I hope you guys had a pleasant 4th of July weekend. I go in my backyard and I could see 3 different areas of the neighborhood where they're throwing up fireworks. And what's really cool about the fireworks is they're so huge and they're so right there. It just always reminds me of all the times we would go down to like a college campus or someplace like that to watch the fireworks. So guys, in Indianapolis, they have a police chief named Chris Bailey. And I saw a report that he was doing July 5th, early in the morning, out there in Indianapolis. Apparently, that night, they made over 20 arrests, and there was about a 1 square mile area of the city where the police chief complained that he saw parents dropping off carloads of children. People were being dropped off via Uber, and then of course people were finding their way down to this area to watch the fireworks. Now you guys know as well as I do, the fireworks probably get done by 8, 9, 10 in the evening, right? And people should start going home after they see the fireworks. But Chief Bailey was really upset because you see, not 1 but 2 kids lost their lives. They were at one particular area, and he was noting that people were rude and uncouth. Everywhere he went, there was disrespect. There were absolutely no parents there with them. Predominantly, these kids were just there in droves, all by themselves. And so they go from one area, and then they get a phone call to another. And as they're driving there, they hear gunshots. They turn a corner and they just see a whole bunch of bodies where there's a bunch of wounded teenagers and kids. And apparently 2 of these kids lost their lives, and he was just upset because there was absolutely no parental supervision. And he was saying that this stuff is getting old and it's getting repetitive, and every single year this stuff is happening. Heck, every single time there's anything to celebrate, this stuff is happening. And it was just really eye-opening because normally when you hear the police chief and stuff, they kind of, tell you what you want to hear. This guy told everybody right there, you guys are doing a horrible job. This is not on the police, and it's not. It's on you as the parents. We are not your children's keepers. You are. That was an actual quote from Chris. When you go and you talk to these kids, they have guns. He did 20 arrests, and in those 20 arrests, darn near everybody had guns, including 2 kids. He even said that one of them had a sawed-off shotgun that they were holding inside their pants. Now, could you imagine walking up to a 13 or 14-year-old kid and finding out that, he and his buddies are all armed to the teeth? That is scary stuff. It makes one think, do we need to quit talking about making the parents responsible for this? And do we need to start putting some actions behind it? Because my thinking is, we could sure cure a lot of this stuff with problemed students and with problemed kids if we just started punishing their parents. And I don't mean some $100 fine, who gives a crap. We need to make it a hefty fine and a hefty jail sentence. And I think we need to start implementing it immediately. And I think it needs to be something that, regardless if you're Republican or Democrat, you need to fight for, because we have a real problem in this country where if one side says, hey, we're going to put a stop to this, the first thing the other side does is say, no, you're not being fair, and then nothing ends up happening. And it ends up making it look like all we care about is the bad guy. And in this scenario, if your child is one of these kids that wants to go and hang out with hundreds of other kids that are up to absolutely no good, I think you should be held responsible. And I think it should be something that makes life miserable for you, because your kids are making life miserable for the police chief and the citizens of Indianapolis. For there to be underage kids at 1:30 a.m. in the morning on July 5th with absolutely no parental supervision. I'm sure there was a couple of parents out there with their kids, but predominantly speaking, it's just a bunch of young people. There's no stores that are open at that time. So, I mean, you know, technically speaking, I don't know if they have some sort of curfew law out there in Indy, but I think this would be the perfect reason to make a permanent curfew law. I would make it for like 11:30 or midnight, get these young kids off the streets, and if they get a ticket for being out after midnight, I think it should go to their parents. I really do. Bad parenting in this country used to mean that the kids were being raised by their grandparents. Do you guys remember that? It used to be, you're a horrible parent. Why? Because you're letting your mother raise the kids. You're letting grandma raise the kids. But grandma actually raised us right. These kids nowadays are being raised by their telephone and by other kids. And when I say telephone, I mean by the internet. They have absolutely no respect. Nothing good happens after midnight, right? That's when they want to be out and about doing nothing good. And when all these kids have guns, guys, if you would have lined up, let's say 50 of my friends, like when I was 17, 18, 19 years old, there was probably only 2 or 3 of them that owned a gun, but they weren't taking it out and about with them, you know, when they're out and about around the town. That is crazy. Could you imagine going up to some 12 or 13-year-old kid and to know that if you say the wrong thing to them, they can pull out their piece and just take your life? Totally unacceptable. Here's the crazy thing. You hear this stuff and you want to say that everybody's on the same page. Nobody wants this stuff to happen again. But one side sits there and says, let's take away the guns from everybody. And it's like, as long as there's criminals out there with the guns, I think people are going to want to keep their guns. What we really need to do is we need to say, hey, whoever breaks laws, we're going to start making it really uncomfortable for them. How come we never see ads? Shouldn't we see commercials on TV that say, hey, you know, when you screw up and you get a felony, it's going to make it darn near impossible for you to find a good job? How come we never have commercials like that? How about a commercial like this? If you get pulled over by the cops, no matter who you are to have your license and registration ready for the officer that comes up to your window. Why don't we just make it a national, federal, like, hey, no matter what, your job is to furnish your ID and your registration for the cops. Because what happens now is the cop comes up, has to beg the person for their ID and registration. Next thing you know, they're reaching for the glove compartment and somebody ends up losing their life. It's ridiculous. And I'm getting tired of politicians saying, why are cops being this way? Maybe it's because of situations like this in Indianapolis. Could you imagine being a cop? All you see every day is people doing horrible things. And then you've got a bunch of people looking over your shoulder non-stop, critiquing everything you do when your life is on the line, not theirs. And if somebody comes and scares them or threatens their life and their security, the first thing they do is call the cops. I mean, seriously, the things we do to our policemen in this country, it's got to be the cruelest thing ever. I think what we ought to do is we ought to just have the body cameras roll, and when people start acting like assholes, because that's what happens on all these videos, that should be extra time and extra fines that go on whatever ticket you get. That's what we should do. When I was younger, you're always thinking, oh, the cops are against me. When you get older, you start to realize cops are against jerks that we have to deal with in society. It's about time we started taking the cop's side a little bit more often. You ever notice when there's a bad cop, that video makes national and worldwide news? When there's a bad criminal, you don't even hear about it? You think any of those top podcasters on the left are going to mention this little thing in Indianapolis? And what happened the other day in Chicago? Didn't this situation happen in Chicago where a half dozen people perished? None of that stuff ever changes. None of that stuff ever changes. Guys, I gotta tell you, it's like the 4th or 5th day in a row of just miserable hot weather. I'm out here at 6:30 in the evening and it's still 108, 109. It just depletes you of your energy completely. I really would like to know why we can't solve these problems. Does anybody else think that? Like, we've been talking about holding the parents accountable for the past 20 years. I mean, we really have. It's not like this stuff is brand new. This shit has been happening for decades. And it's always the same type of situation, right? Where it's like there's all these teens, they're out of control, they're all from the inner city all the time. I think we need to start holding the parents accountable. I think the problem is the leadership in these cities where this happens. I think the leadership is for the birds. That's what's so irritating. You know, it's like if we all worked together, we could help these cities thrive and get past these problems. The problem is, imagine if you have a good kid that loses his life because maybe he's with his parents enjoying the fireworks. I mean, there was a reason for them to be out there, guys. It was about enjoying the fireworks. But at midnight, when most people are already back home, you know, you've got literally hundreds of kids out there unattended. Throw all their parents in jail. That's the real, you know, it's funny, we talk about like, oh, America has so many people in jail. We don't have enough people in jail. We have a unique situation that other countries don't. We have people in this country that just don't want to play by the rules. They don't want to live in a society with people that, you know, where you have to get along. How do you get along with somebody that absolutely refuses to play by the rules? It's impossible. And to know that the thing that makes it keep going forever is that you got blue versus red. Blue versus red everywhere. If red says, hey, let's change this, blue says, not on our dime. You're not doing it to us. And that's the thing that gets me. Why can't we have Democrats stand up and say, just because we're Democrats doesn't mean we have to turn a blind eye to crime? Just blows me away. Whenever we have these talks, I always have to beat up on the Democrats because you guys look at Orange Man and he's like the problem with everything. Well, Orange Man has only been in our lives for 10 years. We've been dealing with people that are committing crime and getting away with it and making life miserable, and everybody runs for the suburbs. Well, you can't really run a world like that. You can't run a country like that where the answer is pick up your life and run to the suburbs. And what a shitty way to live. All because, you know, it starts with the parents. The teachers say your kids are horrible. The police say your kids are horrible. The kids nowadays have zero respect. And it's because the young adults are just older children. It really blows me away. At Robert Torrance 1080 says, set curfew, enforce the law, and then prosecute. Well, here's the problem. They're going to do that for a year or two, and then they're going to get rid of the curfew, and then we're going to have to deal with this problem again. Because every time one side of the aisle says, hey, let's make some restrictions, let's put up some laws, the other side of the aisle says there's no equality, it's not fair. It's the absolute most asinine situation. It just blows me away. God, it makes you feel like the future is absolutely hopeless. Brigitte Tran 6701 says, as a school teacher, I am appalled by the negligent, indifferent, and emotionally absent parents today. Prosecute the parents. Make them get involved in their kids' lives. And you have to do it, otherwise nothing ever changes. That's the real problem. Nobody's ever willing to do the obvious, which is actually prosecute the parents. OceanCat 0500450 says, you can hear a group of them loud-mouthing while the police are talking here. You can't make this shit up. And by the way, I'm hoping you guys check out this video. I'll link it. What you'll hear is one of the best speeches ever given by this police chief. And at the same time, you'll hear snickering in the background. Those are kids that literally, as the police chief is speaking, they're probably there breaking curfew. It's almost like when people see the police, they just think there's the enemy. What a horrible world what a horrible future we have. Data Princess says, wow, Chief's message needs to be played on loop 24/7 on all news stations. Enough already. If you really mean that, then let's say, hey, I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, or Independent, we want you to find a way to start prosecuting parents who aren't willing to be parents. Your kids, I know you want to be their best friend, but you need to be their parent. You're ruining their lives. Falada Junk says the chief is 1000% correct. Parents are the answer, not government or the police. I just want to hear that they're going to be put in jail, each one and every one of them. The Garden Sanctuary 2248 says kids are out of control. Police say it, teachers say it, parents, do your job. Nat Sellers 754 says kids think that gangster shit is cool until it lands them in jail or dead. I just feel like if my kids did this, something would happen to me. But apparently not. Apparently not. Is the answer for us to actually arm our kids, right? Get every kid armed? Is that the answer? Because sometimes I think that's the answer when it comes to the adults, right? Wouldn't it be something if everybody had to learn how to handle and use a weapon, and everybody was actually legally expected to be armed? I bet you that would actually lower armed robbery. Imagine that. It really would. And I bet it would increase politeness and decrease rudeness if everybody had an expectation to be armed at all times. I know you guys are thinking, I can't picture grandma with a gun in her purse. I can't either, but wouldn't that be something? Bedrock Home Central says, kids hanging out at 1 a.m. It's time to hold the parents accountable. Amen, Bedrock, amen. AG 6969 says, until you hold parents accountable for their kids' actions, this will continue. Heavy fines, community service, and jail times for parents and their teens. I'll tell you what, I bet you parents would really take the initiative earlier in life if they knew they were actually going to go to jail. You know, again, why don't we see commercials that say, hey, if you drink and drive, you're going to go to jail? Because we used to see those, right? Why don't we see commercials that say, hey, if you don't wear your seatbelt, you're going to get a ticket and you're going to potentially be in trouble and pay heavy fines? Because we used to see those click it or ticket ones, right? Why don't we see ones that say, hey, when you're pulled over by the police, you're expected to have your license and registration handy, otherwise expect to potentially go down to the jail. Not necessarily to be arrested, but if you don't have your stuff, they need to verify your ID, so you're expected to make that doable for the police. How about if the police pulls you over, you're expected to, take out your car keys and set them. We got to do something. We got to come up with a plan. If your kids are out after midnight and they do something wrong, you're going to go to jail for 30 days. If we had commercials up like this, I think that would be a much better way to spend funds that states take in from the federal government or even from taxpayers. But let me know your thoughts, because you guys never do. And if you never hit the thumbs up button, then the show never gets sent out. Maybe I need to say that at the beginning. Anyway, have a great night. See you tomorrow.